Siva, welcome to this week's RevAmp podcast. We're absolutely delighted to have you aboard. Looking forward to learning from you. And for those people at home who don't already know you, then please just start off by perhaps introducing yourself, who you are, what your job role is, and a little bit about your new company.
Sure, Gideon. Hey, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. So obviously, I, Siva, kind of manage Everstage. So I'm the founder and CEO of Everstage, a no-code sales commissions automations platform. So our customers typically use Everstage to not only help drive productivity for their teams, the ops and finance teams, but also use it to drive performance and motivate the customer-facing teams, right? But before this journey, I was a full-on revenue operations professional. So I managed the revenue operations globally for the SaaS unicorn Freshworks, and kind of saw the journey from when they were double-digit in ARR to like 6x triple-digit in ARR, right? So lots of learning during that process, and also which gave me kind of the conviction to take the leap of faith and start something to solve for fellow revenue operations professionals. Right now, we're building Everstage in US and in India. I'm based in India at this point, and we're seed funded. We're a 1.5-year-old startup. Recently, on a personal note, I just had my first kid, and so I was just thinking what more I could add to my plate, and decided I
Congratulations.
Thank you. So yeah, she's six months old, and it's fun kind of juggling the whole startup world and obviously the personal front as well. So great learnings, and really enjoying it at this point.
And you still have no gray hair as far as I can see. Usually that amount of growth at Freshworks and a year and a half of running your own company, you should have aged like 20 years in that past 5 years, and now a kid as well. So I don't know when you have time to sleep, but well done to you.
So there's not so much graying, but there's a lot of thinning. I can assure you that.
I know how that goes. Great. So I think the background that you shared at Freshworks sets up the stall, so to speak, of knowing what before, during, and after looks like in terms of the challenge. And I think the key topic that we discussed previously is scaling the RevOps function in high growth firms while retaining the positive culture. So I think we should start with perhaps the challenge or the beginning of that journey, which is maybe even understanding when RevOps is needed. You were there at those early stages at Freshworks, so you probably saw some kind of a signal whereby it was time to ensure. What was the characteristics of that? When did you start to become aware that RevOps was really needed?
So I think, so just to give you a background of my journey at Freshworks, I originally started off as part of being the kind of CEO's office, right? And so essentially doing a lot of things that the CEO didn't want to do himself and wanted to delegate to a few folks. And a lot of those things obviously were on the go-to-market side, because the CEO of Freshworks, a product person, and his focus was a lot on the product, right? So that's when we kind of started getting involved in a lot of areas that you would typically associate with sales operations, but we weren't a sales operations function as such, right? So what I mean by that,
I remember the conversation back then 3.5 years ago. So I remember that the conversation did start with the CEO's office, and it was one of the reasons that I was like putting up barriers. I was like, no, this doesn't make sense. Why is the demand to have a conversation about CPQ coming from the CEO's office? I don't believe it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't add up. So that's why I gave Howard and the team a hard time. But continue. Why was that impetus coming from the CEO's office? Because I know there's a good reason.
Yeah. So I think obviously we were involved in a lot of different things, including setting up our mid-market org and the go-to-market for that mid-market org. Account management and the entire customer success as a function as well. So that's when a year in, we realized that it makes sense to now carve this function out and really go all out and call this the ops function and set up this team. And also that was the early stage of when sales ops was evolving into revenue operations. right? Where people saw the benefit of combining all the functions together, right? From marketing to sales to customer success.
Yep.
So we kind of, with that context, set up revenue operations, and I pulled a few members in the organization across. So it was early on to start off a 4-member team in revenue operations that I pulled.
I'm going to interrupt you though, but what was the pain? Was it you got to a certain amount of headcount with salespeople, or a certain amount of revenue? Or there still must have been a trigger. It wasn't just pure strategy. There must have been events that were happening with you. What was going on?
Absolutely. So there were a few things that were happening, right? And it was all around, looking at our sales, marketing, and customer success numbers. And with the aggressive growth plans that we had, we want to make sure that we looked at each of these areas and saw opportunities to optimize.
Mm-hmm.
So things like, hey, how can we look at our funnel and improve our conversion rates in the funnel, right? Or how can we reduce our churn in the SMB segment? Or for that matter, how can we increase our net retention and expand into some of our existing accounts with some of our newer products and cross-sell. So basically, a lot of our growth plans hinged on the metrics driving those growth plans to really fall in place, which meant that it was important to have a team that was focused into understanding each part of the metrics, what's impacting it, how could those be done better. And the value of, therefore, that team was also huge. And this was obviously the overall strategic side. There's always also a lot of the tactical aspects as well, which was around, hey, are the teams are the quotas set right for the team? Are the compensation plans set right? For them to be able to go after those goals. Is the processes set up in place, and so all of those things as well, were pain points that were coming in from the sales teams. They're saying, hey, you know what, at our scale, we need to be even more, formalized. The process needs to be much more structured and all that. So those two aspects, like the aspiration of making sure the metrics fell in place, as well as the pain points coming in from the go-to-market team, both contributed towards setting up this ops function.
So I'm now going to ask you a question, which is kind of off script, just out of what you said there, which is a lot of what I understood historically about RevOps was more retrospective, which is we analyze the numbers, we learn from the numbers, we make recommendations, get approvals, we then optimize, and it's like cyclical, like a revenue flywheel. But what you suggested there was that it was actually more strategic of, here's our target, here's our stretch target, looking at everything that's on the table right now. We can't get there by just doing more of the same. We need to play smarter. The phrase box smart, not whatever it is, basically not ending up ugly and having your face beaten up, but you need to box smart and kind of get there by being more efficient. So it's actually the strategic element that accelerated the need for RevOps. How did you keep the RevOps function agile in a company that was scaling that fast? Because your headcount growth was exponential at that time with Freshworks. So how did you guys remain agile on execution and kind of leading the curve rather than being just reactive? That's a huge task.
Absolutely. I think probably that's the most common emotion that most revenue operations professionals kind of face if you ask them, right? Like, which is, hey, how do I move from being more reactive to being proactive? And it's hard. Obviously, the honest answer is you don't start proactive when you set up the function. You set up the function because there are some pain points and there are some goals, and so you react to it, right? Only when you solve those can you then start thinking about and having the mind space to actually think more strategic. So it does have to start tactical at the start of it. So any company today, when they're looking at their first ops person, they're already looking at that person because there's some pain in the process, some pain in the data, and they want to solve it through this person. So obviously, coming in as a new person into an ops function, setting up the ops function, you first have to solve for the existing pain points before you can move strategic, and which is what we did as well, right? Like the first 6 months or a year of setting up the ops function, we spend a lot of time solving for the process related issues, data related issues, and ensuring that we had the right data driven analyze, for example, right?
So at that time, you said there's 3 or 4 headcount in RevOps, I think, before before you grew to 25 plus. Was your hiring strategy to bring in specialists that would take you over the next 2 to 3 years, or was it your mindset at that point in the hiring to kind of hire harmonizers that would give you a well-rounded, balanced process, kind of like a full stack RevOps person as opposed to a specialist? Out of those 2 possibilities, where was your head at? What was your priority?
Most of the folks, I should say, were full stack. I think it was a combination of 2 things. One, obviously, that was the early stage of revenue operations, and even for that matter, even right now, I think we're in that early stage of revenue operations. So you don't have people who've done very specific things, or there are not too many people that you can find. And with our aggressive growth, we had to also find people quickly. So not only was it a decision that we took, I think it was only the option that we had, which is to go with someone who is more a generalist, who could then be kind of trained into specific areas. So that's how we went about the entire approach. We had folks like one person take care of the entire sales operations, and within that also just one person take care of direct sales, the other person take care of channel partnerships and indirect sales. There was the marketing operations person, there was a customer success operations person, and then there was actually the next person who came in who started looking at the process itself across the board, which is when kind of the CRM as well as the associated areas like CPQ came on board, and then we eventually set up the whole deals test team itself.
So I'm going to bounce that back to you. So I guess what makes a lot of sense about that is when you were hiring, you didn't even know all of the problems that you would face X amount of time from now, right? So how can you hire for problems that you're not going to face, that you've never been through before as an organization, 9 months down the road, 14 months down the road? So hiring, you dealt with, you went for people dealing with what you know and dealing with people who have a certain charisma or characteristics of being able to be flexible to solve new problems together in a way that brought harmony. That kind of makes sense as an agile approach. So does that have we covered the core areas of coverage as you're building out that program? Is there anything? I mean, we covered which functions there were within RevOps. Was there any additional areas of coverage that you needed to address beyond the hiring? Maybe a deeper drill down into processes. Did we miss anything?
So I think I would say, broadly we've covered at least the most of the areas. But I think one of the things was also just ramping up some of these ops folks, right? Who had joined into the team. So I think one of the things that we were very clear right at the interview process was we made sure we evaluated for folks for how they dealt with ambiguity, and so essentially that also came in once post the once they joined us, how we onboard them to make sure that they are able to scale into all of these different areas. Because one of the things is in a fast growing org typically is, and especially I think it's more relevant with the whole COVID scenario where most folks are remote, how do you even get understanding of all of the different things happening across different functions, right? There's a lot of tribal knowledge in each of these functions. And ops is something that needs to have that context across the board for them to, because if you have to start taking decisions on process, on analytics, then without those contexts, it really isn't useful. So, so how do you deal with ambiguity, and how do you ensure that you get all of the tribal context into the ops function, so that people then know why something's being done in a certain way before you can even start suggesting something different, for example. So the whole interviewing, the onboarding process, I think was very crucial into getting that agile motion in the RevOps function.
How long was your average RAMP onboarding process for new hires?
So we had, I would say, probably broadly, I would categorize into 2 different categories. One was more the junior analyst kind of a role in the RevOps function, and the other one was a more mid-level program manager kind of a role. The analysts, I would say, within like 3-4 months, we were able to kind of get them ramped in. But the program manager, would take at least 6 months to kind of ramp, because they just had a lot more context to kind of absorb. They had to also drive a lot of those alignment decisions, because as you all know, the fun part is there's no company where marketing and sales, are, completely friends. There's always things that they don't agree on, and for that matter, even customer success, right? So there's a lot of areas where there's finger pointing as well sometimes. So a lot of those alignment conversations also needs to be driven by the RevOps function, beyond just getting some analysis out, or for that matter, some process improvements, and just executing those in place also required a lot of stakeholder management within the company.
Mm-hmm. So that being said, how did you help or trigger the functions to become more strategic? What was that growth story within the RevOps function at Freshworks?
Yeah, so I think one of the first things that we, like every other thing, you want to show your time to first value, right? And showcase quick win of setting up this function. So we got some of those tactical things, done through data, set up in place, and really cleaned up for analytics, etc. Setting up the quota structure, planning for the next year, annual planning itself. So some of those wins,
Siva, so forgive me, but your audience for that would have been the C-levels, or for VP of sales? I'm going to ask why you're also achieving these wins. Who were the recipients of them? So I'm lining one for one.
Yeah. So for example, if you look at the aspect around just the analytics itself, that was more, depending on the function. So if it was more around the sales funnel, then it's the VP of sales. And there were a few VP of sales at that point in time. I think later we also had a CRO, so, directly to the CRO. And if you were to think of the planning process, then it became, in fact, all of the CXOs. And in fact, we were the ones who were also kind of validating some of the aspirational goals that were coming in from board, right? Like obviously board say we want to double our revenue, and that's just aspirational, right? Like how do you double your revenue? Like all of the things that needs to add up to be able to even double your revenue. So just validating what's in place, what's not in place, what's aspirational, what's realistic, running those scenario modeling. So over there, obviously, it involved, across all of the, like the CRO, the CFO, and the CEO themselves on board. So, yeah.
Okay, so that was the first stage. You said cleaning up the data and then distributing it. Did you have a defined or best practice method of communication? Because it's a really subtle skill that you can be great at RevOps, you could be great with numbers, and then you can drop the ball when, I'm not saying you specifically, but anybody listening to this can really not kind of hit a home run in terms of the communication loop or feedback for those different internal audiences. What was your best practice for the healthy communication of your success stories and wins? What did that look like?
I think one of the things was to acknowledge that the goals of each of these functions would be, while we are all aligned to the overall company goal, it still has their own micro goals as each of these functions. First step is just acknowledge that, and then try and see how from their perspective, how analysis is viewed, right? Like what would, say, for example, you were to say, hey, our conversion rates are poor. The VP of sales is not going to sit looking in and say, hey, yeah, you're right. Right? He's going to say, there's obviously reasons why it's in place, and then there could be this saying, hey, the qualifications of lead is not great from marketing or whatever, right? Like, so just understanding what the micro goals of each of these functions gave us just that context to now position the whole analysis or whatever decision points that we want to take right at the start. And then one thing that we made sure was kept it extremely transparent across all of the functions, right? So we had all of the functions in the same room, and we discussed what the results of our analysis was. We wanted to make sure individual perspectives were heard, and we didn't miss out on any of those nuances which were thing. Obviously, if there was any major changes that were involved, we also made sure that we got buy-in from obviously the CEO or the CRO for that matter, because at the end of the day, you need to have the CXO alignment to drive change, and have that person also bought in before you even introduce this to any of the other specific functions.
So I understand everything at a high level. That's good. That's easy. No problem there. More specifically, your cycle was you were communicating mainly through your QBRs, so kind of a quarterly basis, or it was more like, because you guys were hypergrowth and still are, or Freshworks still are. So frequency and location of that communication channels, like sometimes emails with analysis are just they don't get read, or you cannot guarantee, in fact, that they read that. This is more to the point. You cannot guarantee that they read the analysis that you did, right? That's the worst case scenario, is you did some great number crunching, and you don't know whether people actually read and analyzed it. How did you confirm that that information was consumed? What was your method?
Yeah, so I think like every other firm, I think we did obviously the quarterly business reviews, but these analysis didn't have to wait for quarterly business reviews, right? So we did introduce it whenever we felt it was appropriate, just to make sure we were quick to also taking decisions, and if we have to make changes on once we are all aligned, then it start to happen sooner than not wait for a QBR to happen. So the ways that we did this is obviously we put across a short read, but all of this communication always happened over either in person or over a video conference call.
Okay.
We never let it just share over an email, because as you said, you don't even know if somebody read it or if it was all fully consumed, because obviously there's multiple parts to a lot of these analysis, right? So we made sure we did that in one whole conversation where all of them were in place. We had follow-on conversations as well, to address, whatever questions or clarifications that came from them. And sometimes they were also useful, right? Like, I'm not saying that, we did a perfect analysis right at the start. So there may be some points that we might have missed. So, it would be those first conversations are also helpful in, kind of fine tuning the analysis, and then really doubling down on the aspect that we wanted to change, go forward and change. And then, once we had a couple of conversations, we typically had alignment. In some cases, obviously, even if there were no, like at least one or two functions were disagreeing to it, then obviously we had the CXO come in and arbitrate. And at the end of the day, whatever was good for the overall company goals, I think we just went ahead with that, letting them know that we've heard you, but this is what we would be doing to make.
So in terms of personal leadership style, was your preference to present analysis in that Zoom or in-person meeting and then schedule a second follow-up meeting, or is it more a case of present analysis and potential solutions and then discuss and refine the solutions? There's two approaches there, and I keep coming back to this because I know that time was always a pressure, was always very real and sensitive. That if you can, not only people in startups or high growth companies are often aware that there's a ton of problems like to be resolved. That bit is not new. But the real value add of your RevOps team is when they're not only presenting the kind of fine tuning in the problems, but also the potential solutions. And then we can actually focus from the glass being half full to being, half empty to half full. What was your personal leadership style when it came to that approach?
So generally, when we started off on an analysis, we already kept the stakeholders, aware that we are even going into this analysis, right? So when we came into the first presentation, it was not something that was new to at least the direct stakeholders that something like this is getting done. Because obviously, even for that analysis, we would have had to speak with some members in the team to understand a little bit of the nuances on ground before we could. Because obviously there's no point presenting data on Excel. It had to have more flavor to it. So everybody knew ahead of time that we are even doing something of the sort. So the first conversation when we presented, it was presented with the findings and our high level suggestions based on the findings, and really open it out for comments from individual stakeholders in the discussion. So that's how we went about. So we ahead of time we let people know that we're doing this. We involved a lot of their team members itself in as we were doing the analysis, and in the first discussion we actually had the findings presented along with our high level recommendations.
Awesome. So now just to round off our podcast conversation today, how did you deliver everything that you've already talked about in those kind of 3 core points and retain culture?
Yeah, so I think
retain and build culture. I think sometimes you're still adding and building culture as you scale up. So yeah, retain and build culture even. How did you achieve that?
Yeah, I think so one of the things was to ensure I mean, again, this is more applicable as the organization becomes slightly bigger, because what happens is, there are obviously decisions that are taken as ops function, which may not align with specific other functions.
Right.
May not align with, say, a VP of sales, for example, right? And so therefore, it was super important that we kind of even clarified that all of this is being done. Which, I mean, even if it's obvious, it's important that you clarify that. But more importantly, I think also to make sure you are completely independent and you come across that way as well in all your conversations. Because what happens is, as I said, as you build your RevOps function, you will have folks who are aligned with each of these other functions, right? There's a sales ops person, there's a marketing ops person, etc. And obviously, being closer to that function, they'd have more leaning towards that function, just because they've just worked more closely with them and understand their perspective more closer than the other. So it was super important to present yourself as completely independent in terms of how you went about this, and also at the end of the day, not only talked about recommendations just from a standpoint of, hey, this is not working for you, you need to do this. It was more also talking in the frame of, hey, what could this help in terms of your team? Like, for example, it's not always areas where it's just finger pointing, right? Like, it's really around understanding, hey, how can we really help move, for example, your sales team more towards quota attainments, where only half of the team is attaining 100% quota. How can we move this more to 70, 80%, right? And really make it best in class, right? And working with these, respective functions as well. And, really making them realize that actually the ops is not, trying to find faults, but actually helping work towards how we can optimize, and just making it very clear to them that through actions rather than just words, right? So I think those were things that we kind of did over time. Obviously, made sure we built relationships across the board, and people were comfortable even opening out with us and ensuring that it was all in the good for the company. So it is not going to happen overnight. So anybody watching this, has similar problems that they are facing. I think it's a step-by-step process. Probably takes 6 to 12 months. To even get to some level of comfort across the board, and make sure people feel good about RevOps function, that it's actually in the best interest of the entire organization that the RevOps function not only just does process work, but actually contributes to more of the strategic part of the entire company, and essentially is aligned with each of these functions as well in terms of their interests and goals.
And now, as you look back, do you feel that the strategic nature of RevOps was recognized?
Absolutely. So the good thing is, again, one of the things that also needs to happen for that is a blessing from the CXOs, right? So we did have that at Freshworks. So we got seat in the table for all the important conversations, and our views were were also heard very clearly and independently, because there was also the realization that there was this team which had companies' goals only. They didn't have any specific individual goals themselves, and so in fact, when align it, we had RevOps also on variable comp for example, right? Like, so I had a variable comp which was on the company's ARR, right? So we were very clearly aligned to the company goals,
Right.
and essentially we had the CXO blessing as well to
Mhm.
kind of really have that seat in the table for all of the important decisions.
Very good. So Siva, I'm gonna wrap it up here, and just to tie this back to, maybe don't usually do this for most people, but just tie this back to the impetus for Everstage. Out of your RevOps learning, it was the seed or the impetus for why you kicked off Everstage as a new company. How does one relate to the other? What did you see that you wanted to go deeper with and start your own company?
Yeah, so one of the things, as you know, go-to-market teams, especially sales teams, are on a base pay and obviously a very huge component of variable pay.
Right.
At least, sometimes more than even half of their pay is on variable, right? So, and what I saw was obviously incentives drive behavior. All of us know that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just felt that a lot of, especially B2B companies, were not effectively using incentive structures to actually motivate and drive performance. And what I mean by that is, typically if you think of companies early on, and even at Freshworks, we did all of this on spreadsheets, right? And not only was it not a great use of the ops time and the finance time, because there was recurring busy work every month, but also the aspect of using incentives to actually motivate and drive performance was missing, because there was zero visibility to the customer facing teams of how they got what they got. Typically month end, there's disputes around understanding, hey, I should have got more for this deal, etc. Why is this working this way, and all of that stuff. So actually incentives which were meant to drive performance and motivate and ensure you drive a behavior actually became a sore point in the company, right? Where people are actually not very satisfied at the end result of it. So I really felt, and at Freshworks, we really felt how we can actually, use incentives properly to
Right.
kind of drive performance. And that was the trigger to even start Everstage. So essentially the idea is to really give the RevOps teams across the globe platform that helps not only save a ton of time for them, but also use it to actually help achieve some of their strategic goals through motivating and driving the performance of the customer facing teams.
Fantastic. Well, Siva, we'd like to thank you for coming on board the RevAmp podcast today. We're wishing you a huge amount of success with Everstage, and I'm sure this next year and plus will be a great time of growth for you. Anybody that has questions from what you shared today can easily reach out to you on your LinkedIn profile. We'll definitely hyperlink and connect that below in the text. And I'm sure from everything that I know that you will remain a huge ambassador for the RevOps community in helping us to share knowledge and take that role and persona forward to the next stages in its growth curve, because there's a lot of people out there that are really wanting to see it grow in its own right to the next level.
Awesome. No, pleasure to be on board the RevAmp podcast, and thanks for having me. And thank you for your wishes, Gideon.
We'll stay in touch. Take care for now. Thank you so much.